Hey, this is Huck. Subscribe to Thorin's YouTube channel.
I've got a question for you that goes like this. Obviously, in the time you've cast StarCraft2, there always were the Western heroes. There was Stefano and Nanawa, and then later, obviously, people like Scarlet and Neeb and some of these. But give me some context for you. What is the significance of Serral, though? Is he on a different sort of level for you? Is his impact different?
Yeah, I mean, he pretty much... It's interesting because I think a lot of people outside of StarCraft don't understand truly the big deal of Serral winning 2018 BlizzCon, right? The fact that this game you can go into the annals of history for StarCraft 1 as well, right? All the way back to guys like Gur and whatever winning things over in Korea and stuff like that. But that's ages ago, right? In that time period between those kinds of moments and Serral in 2018, South Korea always won. It was impenetrable. It was not even close for a lot of that scenarios, right? Obviously, there's a lot of naysayers saying, oh, yeah, well, the Korean team houses have disbanded. Oh, the live match fixing scandal caused a lot of problems and stuff like that for Koreans and stuff. So they're not practicing as hard anymore and stuff. But to have someone come out and just kind of smash the scenario that South Korea was always going to win was just... It was mind-blowing. It was one of the biggest things in esports history for us, and I would say outside of StarCraft 2 as well, because this is a game that is one of the very hardest disciplines to master. And it then basically provided the scenario of now we have a Reina, who was a world champion, Oliveira, who was one of the most ridiculous stories of all time in esports, becoming a world champion from China. And now we've just recently had Clem, who's French, become the world champion. So it definitely kind of broke down barriers for a lot of players to kind of realize that it was possible. And obviously Serral's just the phenom, so...
Along those lines, then, another thing I would ask you is, I actually feel like the other bad thing about the fact so many people associate StarCraft 2 with just Wings of Liberty and they remember the end of all the Zergs, etc., is it gave this stupid notion that the game was solved and that there was like a very cynical way people could play. Whereas, to me, that one of the reasons also why this game, like certain fighting games like Counter-Strike, will never die is there's almost infinite depth. Like there's like the cycle turnover of how meta strategies exist. Like there's always something you like. I actually think it's proven itself, right? StarCraft 2 has...
Yeah.
It can always last. It will never be solved, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The thing is that we were blown away by the way in which Serral wins the world championship. But then even, 6 years on, we were then blown away by the fact that Serral this year, at the beginning of this year, then suddenly started having this another impenetrable run, whilst, by the way, he's at the military in Finland. So he's like on and off being able to practice. He rents out a little kind of office near the military so he can go and practice because he's one of them on one of those athlete scenarios, right? Where they say, yes, you can continue to go to tournaments. And then, so we're blown away by the level that keeps increasing. And then we get to EWC this year, where we're thinking to ourselves, well, it's a foregone conclusion. Serral won Katowice, he won Dallas, he won all these other tournaments. He made Maru look like a fool in the finals, which, by the way, it's Maru, who's a god at the game as well. Literally started playing it when he was, 12 years old, and there's nothing other than StarCraft 2. It made him look like a fool. And then suddenly we get to EWC, where Clem makes everybody look like a fool. 5-0 Serral in the finals after 3-0ing him in the upper. We get to, even 14 years into the game, get to see the skill ceiling still pushed. And Clem, obviously up until this point, people will be saying, Serral, he's a god. We watch him play, he's a god. Nobody can touch him. It's crazy levels of play. And then Clem just suddenly shows us this in 2024 that looks unbelievably insane as well. Which is even an extra level above it. We didn't think it was possible, but obviously we're just being disproven year on year on year. So,
who is the Korean? You can pick any era in StarCraft that you vibe with the most. Who's the one that always has a special connection for you?
Good question again. Because there are so many. I'm going to pick one from each race.
Go on.
I'm going to go with Hero. CJ Hero, who is now not on CJ, obviously he's on Weibo, because he won so many Intel Extreme Masters in the early years, and I was kind of there for it all, right? So it was very fun to watch. It became friends with him and stuff like that, and now he's come back, and now he's basically you would argue offline the best Protoss in the world. Again, in 2024. So again, his career's lasted a long time. Thorin, I guess I would go with innovation.
Okay.
Because as much as I like not really like vibe with him as a friend or anything like that, I just appreciated his play. I appreciated kind of the stability of it and kind of how exciting it was to see him just kind of like dominate when he was in his era. And then Zerg for Koreans, I guess I'd go with Dark because he's one of the only Koreans that was able that would show like some spunk, some like he was the foreigner killer, and he would say, "Look, I don't lose to any foreigners," and he would give a bit of lip. He would give a little bit of some attitude, which is very uncommon, I would say, from South Korean players. So, those three I would go with.
A tricky question about casting I have goes like this. So one thing I think actually that a lot of fans in general got to experience a bit like what casting can be like is when we had the online years where we had no LANs, people quickly realised even if it's the same player but in his bedroom and the same caster but in their bedroom, it's not the same, is it? Something's missing. Some of the magic of the cast doesn't exist. And so one thing I'll tell people is, and I know in your games because sometimes you're in Asian countries this happens, is it's also why casters who cast at the venue but aren't on the crowd mics hate it. They hate if they're like the piggyback cast and they're not the one. Because I know every caster I know wants to be in the venue. They want to be going out to the whole crowd and they want that feedback. They want like to know that when they say something, the crowd then reacts, and it's that thing. They tell me that's like essentially that's the moment you really live for. You live for that crowd game, the arena cast, where it's like you're like riding the wave of the audience and their feelings. So do you vibe with that? Do you have a similar sense of like, is that like a peak moment for you in your job?
Yeah. So obviously I don't get to cast to arenas anymore because if I'm at an arena, I'm desk hosting.
Sure.
But you still kind of get the same thing because as a desk host, like I think one of the things that is important is to find transition moments. And how do you find those transition moments? You get more excited, you get more hyped. For like if you're going into a commentator, like going over to the commentators for a game and stuff like that. So, I mean, yeah, you want those moments. And in commentary as well, I would live for those moments. It's weird because during the COVID era, I really actually enjoyed it because I just got to stay home and that's great.
Sure.
But and in PUBG, we go over into Asia, but we're not really doing huge arenas at the moment. I think this is probably more of a fault of PUBG in the way they're kind of operating their esports ecosystem right now because we feel like we've been at war with them for the past 3 or 4 years about like getting the best out of PUBG esports, to be honest with you. But yeah, like getting those moments in front of a crowd, because the thing is that you want to get excited with them. There is nothing quite like casting in front of an audience where you hear the roar of the crowd when the play happens, and then that gets you more hyped, right?
Yes.
Especially if, and this is more production nitty-gritty, especially if the crowd is also well mic'd up.
Right,
because
yes.
Oftentimes you get so many tournaments where like the crowd's going insane, but then the crowd miking isn't great. So if the production doesn't have that proper loop, and sometimes if you've got like very closed headphones on, you don't even get that yourself sometimes. And then maybe the stream doesn't get the crowd reaction. So if you're kind of like reacting to it and they're not well mic'd up, then it can sound a bit disjointed. So yeah.
To ask you a bit about the desk hosting gig, a few angles I would ask you would be like this. One, you touched on it earlier, but one thing I actually want people to break out of is this idea that desk hosting is another position like stage interviewer. By the way, I don't even agree. That should just be a generic person. There are some amazing generic people who can do any game, but I'll tell you what, if you get someone like Smix and she does her homework and she has those skills, they're going to be better because obviously, again, it's a real person who's a real fan of the game and it's going to come across and you're going to know they didn't just read off a piece of paper like, okay, Serral, I see you beat Maru. She knows that. She was watching the game. She wants to ask him this question. So similarly, right, even though the perception of desk host is, again, that's another gig where you just want the professional looking guy and, the experts are there. You ask them the questions. I also, like you said earlier, I think it's a lot better if I can tell the person's also asking some of the questions he's interested in. Like he watched the game too and he's like, how did they win that base race or whatever, So there's that aspect. But then similarly, I think one of the most underrated aspects is you have to think of it, use like the football analogy. It would be like having a bunch of really good strikers, but you got a rubbish midfield. field where you're never going to get the ball to them. Like, you actually need like delivery, as it were. You need people that are going to craft how this person's going to show me his skill set. I think people misunderstand that you're not really just, hey, generic opener, now you insert whatever. That's what the old days used to be like. I can tell you when it first started with desks. But in the modern day, you want a lot more synergy than that, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And a lot of the times in desk hosting, because I like live and breathe this idea, right? Like now I've kind of accepted the fact that most of the time I'm going to be the desk host, not analysis or commentary, even though, as I say, I get to do some of this every so often. So how do I level up my craft constantly? How do I do that? And again, it is by actually, like, my fiance goes crazy because I've got like 3 tournaments open at any given time at home. I'm constantly just trying to assimilate information about StarCraft, about PUBG Mobile, be it whatever I'm covering next. And a lot of the times when I'm desk hosting, I'm not even really asking questions in a lot of instances. I'm just kind of making statements about the game to then lead into topics for my guys.
Right.
Because honestly, like a lot of the people that I work with, I know how they're thinking. I know what they're going to want to kind of like talk to me about in that game. We've just watched the game together. We've just talked about the game together. You literally just bring that to the desk.
Yes.
Obviously, I will ask some, pointed questions at some times and stuff like that. But and I think what also people don't realize about the desk hosting thing is like just keeping it varied. Like EWC, I got a really good opportunity to work with some of the producers that I was like, okay, like whilst the game's just going on or whatever, let's talk about how we can do something slightly different this segment, and what we can do. Like, okay, so we're on the last game of PUBG. There's 3 teams in the running. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say to this person, because by the way, I was not only desk hosting on EWC PUBG, but I was also consulting. So I was like trying to make the show as good as possible. So I was like, okay, let's do this. There's 3 teams left. I'm going to make a pitch for why this team's going to win. You're going to make a pitch for why this next team's going to win. You're going to make a pitch for why this team's going to win. And whilst they're doing that, we can show, like, this guy's pitching TSM. We can show hero shots of the players and all this stuff. So there's a lot that goes into it, especially with talking to production and trying to make it as good as possible. And it helps if you know the game, not just I am generic esports host, which again does drive me crazy to no end. And hey, some generic esports hosts have won esports awards.
True.
Good for them.
That is true. By the way, a similar question I have goes like this. Another reason why, if you notice, I was a little bit dismissive when I said earlier, there's a type of fan who thinks it's like we're doing like an IQ test for StarCraft here, and it's like who can answer the most in-depth. Because another thing they probably miss is this. What makes our horses brilliant isn't just that he watched every game and knows every player. It's like he's a mega professional. Like he can also package it well, and he can also actually like has the mechanics to like bounce off what you say or what you ask him or what happens elsewhere. I actually think a really misunderstood thing that is really annoying on desks, I've worked so many myself, is when you do get someone who maybe is actually like an active pro, or they're a mega boffin about the game, but they don't have the skill set. So for example, their answers are way too long, or you can't bloody cut them off, or you can't get a pointed answer out of them. They're trying to give you like a 20-minute break. Sometimes it's really tricky to deal with people who actually do know loads about the game. Like there's a lot of skills that I feel like are like soft skills that people can't see as they're a fan, They're not seeing the mechanics of how we're doing what we're doing on the desk, right? What would you say to that aspect? Because I know a lot of producers and tournament organizers want to throw pros on the desk. They want every pro on the desk seemingly, but I think some pros are brilliant, some pros are death to the desk for me.
Yeah, for sure. I think we're very fortunate in StarCraft currently to have like pros that have been around for so long, right? So I think maybe it's an isolated incident where a lot of the pros that you bring on, like we brought Raynor on recently, and we've also had Lambo on for the full tournament, actually, for EWC. And you do have to kind of curate them a little bit early on, or at least set expectations, right? Okay, this is how, I ask questions. They've probably also watched a lot of their desks in the first place anyway, so they kind of know what they're probably getting into. But I had a very nice comment from Lambo, who recently was with us at EWC, being like, oh, you're so easy to work with. And it's like, well, by this point, you've done 200 events. Hopefully you should be good enough to be able to try and kind of work these people in. But it is definitely a different skill set, because sometimes they can just be very quiet and a bit meek. And even though they're excellent minds, not willing to give you much. But if you just kind of pull at the strings of what they want, then you can kind of make it work for them. Like, so we have a lot of instances where you bring a pro on and they're breaking down clips or breaking down moments and stuff like that. As long as you tailor what they want out of it as well, and then kind of adjust it to what the broadcast should want, then you can make it work. In PUBG, we have a few very outgoing personalities when it comes to pro gamers. So we've occasionally had them on, but it's far less common. I mean, they've not been around as long in esports, so it's a bit more difficult, I guess.
Right, I know at one point in time you were also doing some of the Heroes of the Storm stuff, right? What would you say? What was your relationship to that aspect?
Well, again, it was another game that I loved, right? Like that's why I wanted to do it. I wanted to enjoy it. I was a Blizzard guy. What was better than having Arthas and Kerrigan suddenly facing off against one another to a Blizzard guy, right?
Sure.
So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be involved. And I've been very fortunate in that every game I've gone into, I kind of have been tier 1, if you want to phrase it as that, right? So I got to be the desk host or commentator for every single one of their big tournaments up until I kind of saw the writing on the wall of where it was going. And I was like, okay, well, I've got to have my eyes to the horizon on what's next. But the people, for the most part, that I got to work with in Heroes of the Storm were awesome. I still talk to quite a few of them, like Dreadnought, who was one of the commentators there, ex-pro, then turned commentator.
There's obviously a bunch of StarCraft people, wasn't it? There was all Grubby and Todd and Kaldor and all these people, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the desk segments we had to fill at a BlizzCon for Heroes of the Storm was me, Grubby, and Todd. And because the stage was completely wired the wrong way, we had to fill for 2.5 hours.
Fucking hell. Okay.
But thankfully, of all people on this desk, it's me, Grubby, and Todd. People that I've been
known them for years, right? Okay.
So we could fill forever, but it was brutal. So yeah, it was good times. I loved Heroes of the Storm. Some of my fondest memories were like a tournament called Mid-Season Brawl that we did in Sweden. It was like a long form tournament across like, let's say 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. And it was the level of play was kind of the level of BlizzCon, which was technically the World Championships, but it was over a drawn out period of time. So you'd get to see the meta evolve during that. And it's actually made me think more about, because Deadlock's on the horizon, I'm like, I kind of miss doing MOBA. So maybe my eyes are on the horizon to try and see if I want to do something like that. Like Deadlock. But the problem with these newer titles that comes out is everyone and their mother wants to do them if they've like failed in other games and stuff like that. So I don't want to be part of the rat race. I'm too old for this shit now. Pardon my French.
By the way, similar to how I asked you about Serral, if someone didn't follow Heroes of the Storm, the sad thing is, look, if you're not a massive Blizzard guy, you didn't miss that much. It was like one of the great esports games of all time. But the one story that must be told, that someone needs to do a documentary one day, is about that MVP team from Korea, the one that had the rich guy on. Like, they actually do have an unbelievable track record of how much they won and how successful they were. And they were like some like flash like Serral of their game, right? They were like fucking unbelievably dominant, right? Do you remember this team?
You mean, are you on about Rich or MVP specifically?
No, like in general, like, I mean, he was considered like the GOAT of the game, right? But his team was one that basically, like, I think they only placed like, I think their worst place was like 3rd or something mental mail, and they had some like unbelievable dominance over the circuit, right?
Yeah, so in the first couple of years, at 100%. Eventually, it became the like Fanatics and Dignitases, which were basically European teams, could rival their kind of again in the early years inassailable position. But yeah, Rich, I think, went on to play League.
Plays League still, as far as I know. Yeah.
Does he still? Yeah. I don't know much about.
He bounced around the regions a bit, but yeah, he was clearly a skilled player. Yeah, like a talented gamer.
Yeah, I think because Bakery, who was on Team Dignitas, as like they reached many finals or whatever, became one of the higher people at Dignitas, Team Dignitas.
Oh, right. Okay.
And eventually, I think he picked up Rich of all. So there's.
Oh no, he played in the LCS like a year ago or something. So maybe that was the connection, right? I see. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know what Team Dignitas does much anymore. No offense, Bakery, but
sure. By the way, here's the question though. Obviously, like that will make sense. Like Heroes, like we said, you're working with some of the same people. It's even the same IP essentially as StarCraft and the other way. Yeah. But how does PUBG come along? How does that come out of nowhere for you?
Well, like 2.5 million people when it first came out, I was also very much enjoying playing it.
Right.
I was in the, let's call it the death throes of me being at ESL full time. So I kind of expressed interest in doing it, and obviously like got a way in via ESL. And it was funny when I did my first couple of PUBG gigs, or my first one especially, because I went into the talent announcement gets done or whatever, and nobody in PUBG knows me really, who I am or anything like that. So I turn up at the event, Intel Extreme Masters at Oakland, and I'm on the desk with Steel from CS, and Avenger, who is like a mainstay analyst guy who used to be a pro before, and he was on the analysis desk. And clearly, Avenger was a little bit skeptical. Great friends now, by the way. Like one of my best friends, he's fantastic. Well, a little bit skeptical of who is this new person coming in? Do they know anything about the game? And I would say my work ethic is pretty decent. So I was like, hey, I'd love to go over my notes with you. Just to kind of like talk about how we're going to present the desk and stuff like that. And he's like, yeah, sure, okay. So we went to the hotel, got a drink, and I show him my notes, and he's like, oh, these are really good. Like this is very extensive. And I was like, well, yeah, of course. I mean, I'm coming into what is effectively a brand new game for me in terms of being a talent. Of course, I want to present it in the best way possible. I also don't want to look like a fool, right? That it's partially a selfish thing, but you just want to do the best job possible. And ever since then, obviously, we've got on like House on Fire, and that's kind of how I got into PUBG. But I do appreciate the fact that I've gotten to do so many different genres now. I think that RTS sets you up for a really good foundation. I think that RTS people in general are pretty. This sounds so big-headed. I think they're pretty smart. If you're into RTS, I think you've got some understanding of like some intricacies when it comes to
this way, I'll corroborate in this sense because I've been in all the games, which goes like this. The amount of people I know who were RTS pros, who almost any of them that ever tried playing poker professionally became really good at it and could make a whole living. Whereas I know plenty of people where like if it's in like an FPS game, mate, flip a coin. They might be completely trash and would never be able to play another game, or they might be a genius. Like I agree, RTS by default, like the way they think, the way they practice, the amount of information you have to take, it does require a certain level of intelligence in both certain other games. I think that's fair.
And there's also a certain reverence that comes with it as well when you go from scene to scene or genre to genre. If you meet suddenly other people in esports and you say, "Hi, I'm James. I originally got my start in StarCraft," and they're like, "Oh, okay."
Right.
Like they understand kind of like the lineage of it, the history of it, and again, like kind of that lofty position that StarCraft still holds, even though, as you say, some people still think it's a dead game 14 years later. So that's also something that I'm very thankful for. The fact that I got my start in a game that really does hold up in a lot of other scenes. So.
Well, one thing you must actually, it's funny to you that you think of yourself as like someone who arrived recently, because I was here like 20 plus years ago. But I'll tell you one area where you're getting the same experience actually, mate. Here's a parallel. Is one of the things that does help me in my career is because it was also in Counter-Strike 20 years ago I was doing. I actually do have that added benefit, no matter what a little kid might think now, which is if I message a pro in Counter-Strike now, I'm not just messaging like a guy. They watched me when they were 12. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You must have so many people in other esports games who were like, bro, I used to watch you in StarCraft. I'm sure you get that experience all the time, right?
Yeah, and actually I sometimes got it from CS guys.
Oh, right.
Which is funny. Because, for example, I would end up going to some CS tournaments or whatever, or like, and Moses would be like, hey, I watch StarCraft a lot, or, obviously I worked with Machine quite a lot. I think one of the nice things as well is that I've gotten to, because I've done so much work in so many scenes, and because we've had tournaments that have run parallel with other tournaments, like we've done a lot of
the IEM stuff,
tournaments.
Of course, yes, sure.
Exactly,
yes.
Yeah. Or even the early days where league tournaments were some of our IEMs.
Yeah.
So I've got the opportunity to like meet and make friends with so many people across the industry, and as you can say what you want about EWC and stuff like that, but I loved my time over there because I got to spend my time with so many people from the industry.
Yes.
So I got to meet some of my Dota friends, some of my CS friends.
I know a lot of people, I can say that's a shared sentiment. A lot of people miss the idea that every event's separate now. Like, for example, you don't have the CS and Dota at the same one as a StarCraft. When you had it all, there was like an overlap, wasn't there? Yeah, it was like a festival vibe almost.
Yeah, 2024 has been like actually so much more like that than the past couple of years. I mean, of course, you can say that the COVID years were a bit rough in this regard. But this year we had Katowice, which I got to spend time with all the CS guys again. We had Dallas, which I got to spend with the CS guys. We had some of the Overwatch guys there. Somebody like Reinforce, who's on Overwatch, for example, used to be our observer in Heroes of the Storm.
Right.
Never mind, I got to hang out with Zoe, who, I met...
for a million years ago, sure.
Yeah, exactly. Like I had spent, I met her 12 years ago in Germany, and we've been friends ever since. And then, of course, EWC, where I got to see everybody. So it was 2024 has been weird because I got to hang out with so many cool people across all these games.
By the way, that's even a part I feel like maybe people who are fans at home wouldn't appreciate about working as talent is another reason why you quickly realise no matter what the day rate is, no matter how big the event is, none of us really do it just for the money and the fame. Because I'll tell you what, Kaelaris, if you ever do an event where the green room isn't any of the people you know and it isn't cool people and you don't get the vibe, the event's just not the same. You know what I mean? You will never think of it as fondly. Like part of it is almost an excuse to talk about StarCraft or PUBG or whatever. We're friends, like people who are also mega boffins and you've all been doing it for years. It's kind of part of the appeal of the events, right?
Yeah, this is why, again, I've said this a lot in this interview, I'm sorry, but like I've been fortunate to work in the games where like people are just kind of like genuine friends with one another. StarCraft, obviously, we've known each other for ages. PUBG now, we've known each other for 7 years, basically, even though, again, the PUBG landscape is very, very strange when it comes to talent, and it's in a bit of a weird position. But I hear these stories of like other green rooms in other games where things aren't as friendly or things are
maybe there's backbiting or people are only like just watching the game, not talking and shit like that. I've heard some stories.
Or things are too competitive.
Right.
I'm just going to single one out right now. I think that the stories I hear from Valorant at the moment, where everybody's being like this hyper competitive scenario, I think it's not good for talent relations between one another. But there is a weird thing in Valorant where it feels like there's 100 people when it comes to talent. So who knows? I could be totally wrong.
Do you feel as embedded in PUBG as you at one point were in StarCraft? You've done it a lot of time now. You've done it many, many years. If StarCraft didn't exist, are you a PUBG guy? Do you think of it that way?
Yeah, for sure. I've aside from last year's World Championship where I couldn't go because of family complexities. We were taking care of my fiance's grandma who had surgery and things like that. Apart from that, and also some PNCs recently, PUBG Nations Cups, because they've really cut down on talent for some reason. I've been at like every big LAN, every big event. I've either commentated or desk hosted every big event. So like I was about to say I am PUBG. No, I wasn't going to say that. But I've been there from the word go, and I like to think that it would be a weird event without me, almost, if it's a big event. Unfortunately, we're in a scenario now where they keep cutting down on talent lineups, and there's not as many talent included, or they keep kind of watering down the talent pool too much. And they're making it hard for people to really sustain just being PUBG talent. Because of this watering down effect. And for me, it's okay because, again, I have other things that are going on, and I do feel like I could also transition to something else if something does come along, because I've been able to do it so many times so successfully. But for the other guys, it's a terrifying prospect when when this watering down effect happens.
Because if people don't know, another thing about PUBG that's quite interesting is maybe it's actually the past that it originally was like the second game for a lot of people. If I was to list off these talent lineups, you would almost everyone who comes from a different game would know some of these people. Like if you know Valorant, they have people like Hypoc and fucking Pansy, etc. Yep. If you know StarCraft, Jorisar's there. If you know fucking Dota, the Toffees guy who used to do the interviews there. Tech Girl, if you watch Counter-Strike. The actual overlap in PUBG is crazy. It's almost no one's just only from PUBG, right? Everyone's someone you know from the industry already. Sounds like a cool mix, mate.
Yeah. I mean, it's been really nice for the last 7 years. I do think for the first maybe 3 or 4 years, you could have sustained yourself on PUBG alone. But now with the current trajectory, it gets a bit more difficult. I personally question quite a lot of the decisions. For example, this last PNC, the PUBG Nations Cup, that apparently just had the highest viewership of a tournament in PUBG since 2019, but they had like 100 co-streamers. They had 2 English talent. 2 English talent, whereas
Right.
all the other rosters had like, Koreans had 5 or 6, like Spanish had like 5 or 6 and stuff like that. And I'm like, why are you doing this? Because you're keeping 2 talent on for 6 games, as well as your pre-shows, as well as your desk segment and all this stuff. Whereas actually having a desk, having other people's opinions is very, very valuable. And another thing that they've done recently is they've moved from, the past 2 years, I would say, internationals have moved from a 3-man desk to a 2-man desk.
Right.
And as a desk host, 2-man desk is crap compared to a 3-man desk. You can't just have a back and forth with one person and just kind of get all the information you want out. It can't also inject as much fun and interest in it with just 2 people. 3 people creates that dynamic of a proper big conversation, and you get multiple takes. You can have people, more easily disagreeing with each other about a potential scenario and things like that. So I have been lobbying for what feels like for this full 2 years to get 3-man desk back, and I have thus been unsuccessful, and I'm a bit disappointed, but so maybe I don't have much power at all.
A question I have for you about PUBG is this. I remember once doing an interview with someone who used to be an old school Counter-Strike player who came back in esports and became a PUBG competitive player. He was a Swedish guy. And he told me that the thing that was very weird for him was, obviously PUBG, the game everyone remembered when it was just for the public, was the giant, obviously Battle Royale style. Whereas I know in esports, they gradually kept changing the rule set until it became this thing with the small group, the 3v3, and you pick where you drop and all that jazz, right? Are you someone where I feel like an obvious question to ask about PUBG is, does that aspect of the competitive part, do you think they ever nailed it in the way they wanted to? They obviously wanted to appeal to the wide people, everyone who played all the Battle Royales, the Fortnite kids, the PUBG. Has it become its own distinct entity as an esport, the competitive side? Does it actually play into, it's quite distinct essentially from what you play in a Battle Royale. So what do you think the essence of PUBG competitive is? What are you watching for there? Is it more is it like a Call of Duty vibe because it's like a small team of people? What's the vibe of the esport for you?
So you were saying the 3v3.
Yeah.
That's the Apex stuff, no?
What was it? It started off as they used to do actual real battle royales. I remember in Korea they had massive thing 50 PCs. They were doing actual battle royale, and then eventually didn't it become a team-based thing where it was small teams of people who competes within PUBG? So
we're 64 players in a lobby, and it's 4v4v4v4 all the way up, right, for organizations. The one thing that you're referring to in terms of
maybe that's what I meant. Maybe it was 4-man teams instead of 3. Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah, sure. So the thing you're referring to in terms of the format changes and stuff like that, we've done quite a lot of format changes year on year on year. And when you're a 7-year-old esport, I would say the last 4 years they've tried to change the format and stuff like that. We had something called super settings, which is literally just a kill is 1 point. If you place first, you get 10 points. If you place second, you get 6 points, blah, 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 all the way down. You play 18 games in a final, and whoever gets the most points wins, right?
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, okay.
That's technically the normal format.
Right.
And then another year came along, and they were like, right, we're going to change to winner chicken dinner format, which was whoever gets the most wins in the finals wins the tournament, which obviously has its own problems. And then they changed back to Super, and now this year they tried to change to Smash Tournament, which is basically just the Apex Legends format of you get to a certain point threshold, and then after that, if you win a game, you win the tournament.
Right.
Bang. Now, my issue with winner chicken dinner and Smash Rule is that for me, PUBG actually isn't a shooting game at all. To me, PUBG is a strategy game because at this top level, anybody can shoot. But not everybody can do the macro moves, the choices.
Right.
Okay, how are we going to move? Which compounds are we going to take relative to the playing path? How the circle has popped, where we think everybody has dropped relative to those things and stuff like that. So the big macro plays are actually what drives my interest for PUBG more than anything else, coming from StarCraft and which it surprises me that more RTS people didn't get into PUBG because of these kind of bigger macro decisions that actually go down. Todd actually was one guy that loved playing PUBG, and I was like, man, come along, come get involved. And it never materialized. But they need back to the format thing for a second. Sorry, they need to stick to one format and see it out to allow. Super is what people enjoy. There is also the discussion of PUBG Mobile is very successful in a third-person perspective, right? Which is far more approachable for players because, I mean, even on PC, a large portion of our player base plays third-person perspective compared to first-person perspective, because first-person perspective is quite daunting for people compared to third-person. I think it's wild how many people play third-person on PUBG PC, but yet we still do tournaments in first-person.
Yes.
So... Who knows?
I mean, basically, like you actually did a very good answer there. What I was trying to essentially get to the essence of is the problem all the Battle Royale games have is what the mode that makes it incredibly popular around the world can never be the mode really that you use for the esport, right? You're trying to find some compromise where it still has some unique essence. Sounds like you've nailed it though. Like I actually think that makes a lot more sense. When I heard before, the team approach was like you're just doing like a watered down version of a Battle Royale, but with teams. Whereas what you're saying actually makes more sense. The idea it's actually like the strategy elements and like you have multiple times you play in the final. It's just the point system that makes a lot more sense. That sounds like it makes sense.
I love the strategy aspect of it. I couldn't care less about the team fights that much. I mean, obviously there's the strategy and there's kind of ways you're maneuvering in the team fights, and that's exciting, and how you're using your utility. We've had a lot of extra things added through the years, right? And PUBG is in the best place it's ever been. Like if you go and play PUBG now, it's in the best place it's ever been, despite people saying, oh, isn't that a dead game? Is the esports still going on? Yeah, we have still 250, 300,000 people still playing it at any particular time. So it's still very high up in the charts. But we've had like so much extra utility added, guns added, mechanics added, like emergency pickup where you'll be in a bad spot. So suddenly you need, like, you're really far away from the circle, but you've found an emergency pickup. So you'll put down a bag. Your 40 players will connect yourself to it, and then the plane like James Bond will come and pick you up and drop you into thingy. But it comes with its own problems, right? Because people at this level will shoot you out of the sky. So when do you use this? How do you use it? Do you use it and then get cars? Because cars are... I could go on forever, but the point is that there's so many strategical elements that make PUBG exciting for me. And that's what I really like. And it's why I really enjoy getting to be on the desk or like when I get to cast, talking about these cool strategy elements.
Because I'll tell you straight up, Kaelaris, a bit like the aforementioned World of Tanks, I know some people, we won't mention their names out of politeness, who I can tell you only did PUBG because it was like a gig that had the money, like they wanted to do another gig, or they weren't as, like you said, they weren't as big in another game and they thought, right, what I'll do is I'll go big in this game, then I'll try and leap back over to the sequel or another game I want to work in. You actually have a genuine, authentic interest in it. Like, it's actually a game you're into. Like, it's not, you weren't just doing it as a stopgap, right?
No, of course. Yeah. I mean... as I said at the beginning, when admittedly when it released in 2017, like people's criticisms of the game were well founded, right? It was a bit clunky, but there was this natural charm to it because realistically, apart from like some things in H1Z1 and Armor or whatever, it was the first proper battle royale game, the first proper one, and the charm of it. And I mean, even I think if you probably presented it to a lot of people that played it and then have kind of gone away, Erangel as a map was a very charming map, even though it's gone through different iterations and it's very different now. There was this charm about the game, and to me still is, because the way in which all the strategical elements come together to make this, because I will still hold that it is the best paced battle royale game. You can watch, like, in our early game is sometimes a little bit slower and stuff like that, but late game, when people are making all these decisions, it's fantastic to watch. Compared to, I would say, Apex Legends is just a bit too chaotic. You'll watch a late game scenario and there's 8 teams alive and there's abilities going off everywhere, and you're like, okay. I get that it's fun for people to play in an arcadey way, but watching it at the top level in those late game circles is just a bit too frenetic, a bit too chaotic compared to the methodical pace which our battle royale goes off. It's each to their own, right? Like, some people might like that. That's fine.
One thing, by the way, as you referenced earlier, was it must also be cool in the modern day when actually none of you are actually ESL employees working in that closed office to get to do the odd event with people like Pansy. You get to reconnect, right?
Yeah, I haven't, unfortunately. Obviously, she's just been focusing on Valorant a lot right now, right?
Understandably, yeah.
Yeah, I can completely understand. I feel like maybe they fell out of love, like Pansy and Rich, for example, who were actually kind of our mainstay duo for a long time. I think fell out of love with the game a little bit when it went to that winner chicken dinner format that I talked about earlier, where it was just like you get into the final, whoever wins the most games wins, because it takes away from, and I know that harks back to the idea of this is battle royale.
Sure.
You've got the win,
Sure.
but it does take away from some of the strategical foundations that we've laid in this game, right? Which is, okay, you're buggered in this circle, but hey, well, at least we can try and like kill as many people on the edge of this circle and try and kind of salvage back some points this way, right? So, but I can completely understand why, say for example, Pansy, who was probably promised, hey, here's 100 days of Valorant a year. Do you want to prioritize us? Almost certainly, right? Like if you're given that stability, why on earth not? So, but to connect with some of these people, like a good example is Machine, right? Because I said in 2024, we had Katowice, we had Dallas, we had EWC.
Sure.
I get to see someone like Machine, who I was across the desk from for a few years. Getting to connect with Machine again was fantastic. I got to see Shocks in Katowice for the first time in probably 8 or 9 years as well. Oh, sure,
because they moved to Berlin and all that with LEC. Yeah, right, I see.
Yeah, because originally they were downstairs.
Of course.
God, that was a weird time.
Yes. A lot of people don't know. If people don't know, it was never made that explicit. If you don't know, guys, if you were a fan of the EU LCS, it was just hosted in ESL's offices in Cologne, basically. That's where that little studio was just it. That was all it was, yeah.
Yeah, it was. But I mean, Shocks obviously has done brilliantly for herself as well. She's kind of expanded out as well. I think she was a little bit surprised to see me actually when I saw her in Katowice, but we only had a brief conversation. They were going out to some party and this whatnot. Who else do I get to connect with? Jason Kaplan is doing PUBG Mobile.
Oh, right, sure. He was an older ESL player, if people don't know yet. Did a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Don't get to see D-Man really anymore. I guess he's doing something at Freaks for You in Germany. But yeah, that's about it, really.
By the way, one thing about this as well was that's another reason why, for me, you're of a generation that will never get this again, where there isn't like a generation of people who work at full-time for ESL, and then they pick you as talent, and then they scout you, and then they start to put you in the events, and they figure out what games to use you for. Because that actually did have, if you look at the people who came through that system, you, Machine, Pansy, it worked. It was a talent generation machine, and it did gradually level people up, and it gave them experience. And also, as we're talking about here, the difference is if I was on a Counter-Strike event, I'd just go home at the end of the day. Machine can actually work with someone and they can level him up or tell him do this differently or whatever. But I know one thing about that is daunting, though, was the period where everyone started to transition to being freelance and eventually not work with the ESL, right? As much as when everyone was in that system, Claire, I know everyone used to whine like, no, I only get to work the ESL events and I can't be on this event or this event. I've heard about this day. I'll tell you what, the same thing though, it is nice to know you've got that many guaranteed events a year and that if they have the next one, you're their guy. You're going to be on that event. They're going to put you next to. When you first went freelance, was it a little bit daunting? Was there any sort of concern like, will I starve? What's going to happen to me? Will they forget about me? Did you have any concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. They said, obviously we're getting rid of all the talent or whatever. You're going freelance, and I'd never truly been freelance. Maybe for a first year or so, where I was being paid 600 euros to come and do the Intel Extreme Masters World Championship, and I was like, wow, 600 euros, this is amazing. Yeah. But I mean, going freelance is the best thing we ever did. You very quickly realize it's the best thing you ever did, because all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, it's time to be on day rates and stuff like that, and it's time to potentially work with some other places, because there were certain scenarios where people weren't as keen to work with you because you were under the ESL banner.
For sure. They would feel like you were crowbarred in or something, right?
Yeah. And at the same time, even if you did go and work at an event outside of ESL would say, okay, but we want 50% of your pay from that event. And when I was at ESL, and I love the guys over there still, but I would always rally against that. I would always say 50% is too much, because it is actually in your interest that we go away and do these other events, because it makes us bigger.
Gives you cachet. Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. I tried to get all the other talent to rally against this notion.
I imagine it didn't work.
No, nobody wanted to really rock the boat.
No, who does?
I was a bit. I'm all about justice, and I thought 50% wasn't exactly just because of those reasons.
By the way, along these lines as well, I feel like another thing people don't appreciate is I understand why people are nervous, like, will I get hired and all the rest. What another secret I feel like if you're just a fan at home that isn't made explicit about the talent industry is you guys are judging us, like I said, off weird metrics like, does he know enough about the game? Does he seem like he's an expert? Do people like him? I actually have had to learn myself. Like, I used to think that was what the game was like, and it's just if you're the best and you know the most, you'll get all the gigs. Like, sadly, it's like someone would probably tell you and you wouldn't want to hear, which is it's about networking. Like, the key, I've always told people, the real secret if you want to be talented is you need to have a guy within each of those big tournament orgs that you want to hire you, who basically is like, you're his champion, he fights for you. He tells them in the meeting, let's put this guy in the event, I think he's pretty good. Like, those 2 or 3 relationships can be worth their weight in gold, and you actually should even think of that as like almost like your patron. You want to actually make sure you maintain those relationships and people do appreciate you. Like, it's not just be the best and someone will find you and hire you, right? There's a lot of subtlety to the industry, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's even I think it's harder now than ever before, because I think that what has happened in these games is, I hate to use the Zoomer lingo, but there is, if somebody new is coming in, you sort of have to pass the vibe check amongst the current existing talent that do exist. And I don't really mince words anymore. You know, I'm 36. I'll, like, when it comes to new talent trying to rise up, I'll tell them whether or not, like, you know, they're going in the right trajectory or not. And
how is that received though? Because I can imagine some might love it, but some might actually secretly low-key hate you. Like, how does it work?
I think some people that have messaged me recently probably dislike me for how long I've been with them.
Okay.
But I mean, what are you supposed to do, right? Like, I think I've helped some people in the past with this. I'm not going to name names or whatever, because it's not my story to tell. But I think I've helped some people in regards to helping them be more malleable when it comes to passing that vibe check, as it were. But also, I think that I've maybe dissuaded some people from pursuing a career that is just not going to work at all. Some of these games are not the biggest games. And as much as like a StarCraft or a PUBG, who knows how long they're around for anymore, trying to get into some of these circles, is there any room? Like, are you suddenly making enemies because you are suddenly taking days off of other people that are effectively your competition? So you've got to balance this weird kind of scales of, these people are my competition, but also my friends, and I have to pass this vibe check with these people. How am I going to do this? Some people come in too aggressive, right? Like, and some people on the tier 2, tier 3 will almost be in Twitch chats and badmouth the current talent, but then suddenly expect to be working with them in 6 months down the line. So it's difficult at the moment, because if you do not have those connections, like you're saying, those network connections, like, again, I'm very fortunate to have, you know, a lot of people that I know in ESL in all these places. If you don't have that, how do you do it? So I don't envy people wanting to try and come in at the moment. But at the same time, how many of these people want to be in because they love the game, or how many people want to be in because they just want to be famous? And that's also something that you have to kind of like figure out with some of these people. Yeah,
that is actually a very subtle point. Like, if people don't realize, actually, there's 2 parts to that. One is, I've always thought, because I've done this many times with journalists, mate, if someone appears as a journalist in my sphere and I go, oh, is this person I never seen? This is an interesting article. I'll just do the immediate advanced Twitter search on Twitter. If they ever flamed me, it's like, right, close that down. That's the end of that for today. You're done, mate. You know, because in that scenario, the thing that people do make a mistake on, I think, is they forget, well, a year earlier, they were just a fan. And it's like, bro, I would just delete all those tweets you ever made. Like, you don't want the guy who's going to work with you on the next event, like you say, seeing you like flame him for some event before. Like, he's not going to take that as like a funny thing. And then similarly, along similar lines, when you get into a green room, as we've just said here, right, if you're the guy, by the way, that it's really fun to watch a game with you and agree with me, you're set. You keep doing events and people are going to love you. They never get. If you're the guy where, no matter how good you are on the desk, if you're really annoying in the green room, or people don't like that you argue, or you won't talk to them, or you're only on your phone, that's death. You don't know it maybe now, but that will catch up to you, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. There's been a few instances recently where these things have happened, right? And as someone who is now, I guess you can call me a veteran now after this many years, you know, these tournament organizers or these people that are at the top will come to me and say, hey, so how did you enjoy working with this person? Right. Or, you know, what's your feedback regarding this person? And I'll just say straight. I mean, of course, I'm not malicious. I'm not there to like ruin somebody completely. But if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. Yes. In some of these scenarios. So I mean, I don't want to be the hand of judgment. No, but here's the thing.
I'll tell you a positive way that you're doing that as well. It's not like you're picking people just based on if you like them. You also want the show to be awesome. Like, you're contributing towards something that has a legacy for you. You want the show to be great, right?
I'm about meritocracy, very much so. Like, if I don't like you, but if you're actually just unbelievably good, right? Like, that is going to be able to trump a lot of scenarios. We have had a very odd scenario in PUBG recently where they keep, for some reason, bringing in stage hosts that just have no clue what's going on, right? And straight away, I'm like, this doesn't just make the show look bad. This makes us look bad, right? Why have I had, as you know, a 14, 15 year person in esports, why have I done 200 events and worked on my craft, and then suddenly you've brought someone in who just is floundering on an international stage, on an international show? What is going on here? You are not only making your show look bad, you're making me look bad upon reflection, for it, if you know what I mean. Maybe it's an ego thing. Maybe I'm like, oh, I don't want to look bad in this scenario. Maybe I can just carry myself being on a desk and just kind of separating myself from that. But I just want the show to be as good as possible. That's all I care about. Or making the players the stars. So,
I mean, I'll give you an example. I can totally relate, because like I'll give you a great example. So Smix, once upon a time, like 10 years ago, came into Counter-Strike, right? And because she knew completely, obviously her game StarCraft, we all know her from that game. And the joke is, I used to watch her on StarCraft, so I was like quite welcoming. But early on, she used to do too much research, Kaelaris. Like, she'd have like 1 million notes. I'd tell her, like, but you're only going to use like, 2 things off this paper. She was like, yeah, but I need to know that I was right. And I did. But here's the funny thing. I always appreciate that, even though I would have sort of told her, you don't need to do that. That, just as someone who comes from the game, though, as an endemic, I would be like, that's dope that you did all that research. Like, you really cared to know that you had all your facts squared away, and you wanted to know some obscure thing about this guy from 3 years earlier. I'll tell you what, the people who came in, who, by the way, again, no names mentioned, are like real pros. Some of these people, by the way, will be in a Hall of Fame. They actually are the greatest hosts ever from the era when you did every big event. You blid clawing into this event, into this event. But I'll tell you what, if they never did any work, Kaelaris, when they came in the room, and they were asking me something like, so is this team good? And you're like, they've won the last 3 events. Like, that's worse. That's way worse. I'd rather have the person who went overboard with, the trying to almost like you're saying, almost trying to pass the vibe check, trying to show us like, hey, I get that you guys live this. So, hey, I'm not a tourist. Like, I've put in the hours. Like, look, here's my homework, as it were. I vibe with that way better than the person who might be a mega pro on camera. Maybe like they could be on like, they could host Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. But the difference is you could immediately say like, oh, you don't really give a fuck about this game. Like that does sap a bit of your sort of vibe for the event.
Yeah.
I know what you mean.
No, I get you completely. It's funny. Before this interview, we'd never spoken to each other, even though we knew about each other for 14 or 15 years. And now we're suddenly we're going on massive rants about esports. But at the same time, though, it's because we love esports.
Yeah.
Right? We love this idea. We love this notion. We want these shows to be as good as possible. I will say, though, in the past, I would say this year for esports, there was a moment at the beginning of the year where I was like just very frustrated with how talent was being treated across a lot of titles, a lot of events and stuff like that, because they almost made me think about doing something else.
Oh,
right?
okay, right.
But then the realization dawns on you of like, yeah, but I love esports. I can't do anything else. I love this so much, but. Tournament organizers and tournaments and stuff like that, I think that there's an advantage to them of keeping talent down.
There is.
What I mean, or keeping them under the thumb.
Sure.
Right.
They want leverage over you. Yeah, they don't want you to go and do other things necessarily.
Yeah, I think they don't want like another tastosis scenario.
By the way, you know this, but that's literally the line they say behind closed doors is we literally don't want another tastosis. I can tell you in Counter-Strike there were certain people they told that to, like, you will never be tastosis and run this industry, basically.
Sure, yeah. Because they know that as soon as, especially a duo, if a duo can build a certain branding and a certain thing around them, they can start charging big money. And I think probably also, like, if you really want to kind of talk about a more recent example, I think Riot's probably scared of eventually having another Shox on their hands.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Like, she has a lot of power. She's probably one of the only esports talent from the top games that I think really holds a lot of clout with her social media.
I mean, she's bigger than the game, let's be real, right? She's bigger than League. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an interesting dynamic because I think that it's potentially pushing tournament organizers to want to pay people less. Maybe, as I say, with the PUBG thing, water down the talent pool a little bit, hold a bit of more of power over them, even though some of the guys that I'm talking about, like myself or Avenger or Toffees, like we're the guys that have been at all the events, but then suddenly we're getting offered less days and all of this kind of stuff. So is this just where I vent frustrations? Is that what I'm supposed to do?
Here's the thing. It is reflections. I've got a question along these lines I can ask you, though. I know what you mean, because I'm almost certain everyone who's been in the industry long enough has had the moments where enough things piss you off in a row that you think, shall I just say fuck it and just go do something else? But here's the thing. That's actually where my iconic I am esports comes from, Kaelaris. Because what essentially my realization was is like, wait a minute. Why would I let these people who came in after me push me out of my game? Like, bro, I have lived this game most of my adult life. Like it's not like I wore this, but I've put a lot of hours in because I love this game. I want the scene to be better and the community better. So I'm sure you have a similar vibe. Like part of it's like, as much as things frustrate you, you also realize where you can contribute though. Like you can shape things to be somewhat the way you want them to be, or you can affect change with how your status in the community. You're not just a Johnny come lately.
Yeah. I like, especially again, I keep referencing EWC, but it's kind of just happened. So, but like, working with some of these tournament organizers, and again, they know I've been around for a long time and they know that I have a pretty good mind for this at this point, right? Like, it's great. It feels so liberating to be able to have impact on a show, be able to help and craft a show, craft a segment, make this as good as you can possibly make it. Like, even think, like, for me as a desk host, I love thinking about how I can do an intro or an outro differently. Like, not just the generic, hey guys, welcome back to the EWC. Today we're going to be talking about these games, blah, 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 but just like making a headline. This team just won. Let's, instead of just saying welcome back, which is just bollocks, who cares? With like, just being like, Sonic's just won that last game, an absolute obliteration of the rest of the lobby as they look to poise themselves for the champion. Right. Anyway, I love having impact on the show. And my frustrations this year have stemmed from the fact that in a lot of our PUBG tournaments, we can't have any impact on the show because we're working with some of these companies over in China and stuff like that, where honestly, there's quite a language barrier. And I can't talk to my producer about how we want to do things. And they present you a rundown and you're like, they say, this is the rundown. And
you're
I'm
just hitting a mark when the timer comes up, right?
Yeah. And we're showing the same graphics every single segment.
Piggybacking,
So those are some of my frustrations that I've built recently, where for years and also now at EWC, have an opportunity to really help and really make the show entertaining. And I feel like some of our shows recently in PUBG have not been entertaining because it's so rigid. And I just want to, I want to be able to break out of that mold, but I'm restricted. And I've aired these grievances and frustrations, but nobody listens, unfortunately.
Everyone needs a support network, and mine is, of course, my Patreon community, the Screwminati, who, in many ways, they're the Sonny to my Cher, saying, I got you, babe. So this video and all the others on my channel were kindly supported by the following names: Ahmed Hadju, Mac Pugnaccio Rakula, Adam Tomlin, Animosity, Jensen Go, Tosh, Toucan, and you know it. Jerky's Minion, my main man, always going to be referenced, one of the best patrons of all time. Would you like to ask a question in my AMA? Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest to say on my channel? Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming Reflections and Talk to Thorin interviews are. Maybe you want to do one of those long discussions where you get to set the topics we talk about. Well, if any of these or others appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Screwminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.